Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LEC Round 3 overview and analysis. Now, Round 3 may give you the implication that there are a few games that we're going to be talking about today, but in fact, it is only just going to be the one series in Round 3, which is going to set up our semifinal, or our loser's final, or whatever you want to call it. It is the battle for 4th place, technically, as the loser of this series will technically still be making Worlds, but will be making it as the lowest seed in the LEC. So definitely some stakes here, even though both teams have officially, every team left has officially qualified for Worlds. This is going to set up a pretty big matchup in the semifinals to see who goes on to face G2 in Grand Finals. But before we get into the series itself, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of this series. Did it go as you expected? Did the people who won surprise you at all? Did the game state surprise you at all? Certainly it was an interesting series, and I'd love to hear what you guys' thoughts are down in the comment section below now or after you end up watching the video, whichever. You know I love talking to you guys, but let's not waste too much time. Let's go ahead and jump right into the series, and like I said, it is the two teams that, I guess, least qualified for Worlds so far. One coming from loser's bracket, one having yet to win a best of 5 in the playoffs. It is the number 3 seeded Mad Lions team taking on the number 5 seeded Fnatic team. Very, very interesting how both teams got here. Obviously, Mad Lions, the number 3 seed here, the number 2 team in summer regular season, but because they finished 7th in spring, they didn't have the championship points to get the number 2 seed, so they fall to number 3. Fnatic, having gone on a pretty huge win streak to get here, obviously winning a lot in the last week of the season, going 3-0. Other than the tiebreaker, in the final week of the season, and then also beating Excel, beating Misfits to put themselves in this spot to qualify for the World Championships. Mad Lions, a little bit of a different route, having only played one playoff series so far in summer, and that was a loss in 5 games to Rogue, who then ended up losing to G2. So definitely two teams coming off of very different paths to get here. Fnatic is probably as hot as they've ever been all year long. Mad Lions maybe not so much, but it is still their meta, so anything can happen for both of these teams. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and just jump right into our analysis of the games, starting with, of course, game number 1. And game number 1 was won by Fnatic. Fnatic pretty dominantly won this game, and I don't think you need me to tell you that it was dominant. It was a 19-minute pro game in the playoffs. This might be the fastest game of the year. I don't actually know to fact check that. It feels like it would be. I don't remember talking about any other 19-minute game this year, but you know, my memory may not be perfect, I guess. Either way, this is absolutely unbelievable that Fnatic came out and absolutely obliterated them in game 1 like this, kind of continuing their momentum that they generated in the playoff series prior, and really doing it in the way that they had in a lot of those series, which is Razork really being able to take over the entire map and control the pace of the game, which he did very, very beautifully, so much so that he is a pretty easy choice for player of the game in game number 1 here. He has been getting so many of my player of the games throughout the playoffs. He has been so integral in Fnatic's resurgence. If he can keep up this pace, this team is absolutely devastating, but a great pick with the Trundle here. I don't even love this draft for Fnatic. In fact, pretty much everything outside of the Trundle, I'm definitely not a huge fan of. Obviously, I like Lucian Nami as a lane, but I certainly don't like it paired with the Renekton. It means you don't really have any side of the map that is designed to scale into the late game and designed to teamfight. If it doesn't get ahead, you don't really have a backup plan. Your quote-unquote backup plan in this comp is actually Victor, who in my opinion just really isn't all that strong right now, and so I really don't like this draft overall from Fnatic, but they are able to execute on it significantly better, mostly because Razork absolutely destroys the early game here. He completely out-jungles Elyoya early on, is able to get Wonder in a really phenomenal position against Armut here. And obviously, Renekton does scale relatively well as long as he has gold. It's not perfect, and you can say the same thing about Lucian. Like, these champions do scale, but it's very risky. You do have to get that early lead. If you go neutral with either of these champions, Kennen, Neela, Nocturne, these are all picks that are going to punish you for going neutral. Luckily for Fnatic, they did not go neutral, as Razork had a great game, and Wonder had a great game, absolutely obliterating Armut in the top lane matchup. Obviously, a ton of gold getting on Wonder in the early game, essentially setting up Armut to not really be a factor in this game, which was absolutely ginormous for Fnatic, because this comp is really built around the duo of Kennen Nocturne. We've talked about this on the channel. You know, it's been brought up quite a bit. Obviously, LNG just played it. I talked about this yesterday on the channel, but it didn't quite work out quite like it did for LNG, and it certainly didn't work out like I've been hyping it up to. I've been really, really complimentary of the Ken and Nocturne solo lane duo. I think the teams that can pull it off have often been very effective. I believe at a team, in a team fight, this is something that is really difficult to overcome, and I can see why you look at this comp from Mad Lions and you go like, holy crap, like, if we get this to work, like, we just win the team fights, period. Like, if we go in relatively even. The problem was that they didn't have any sort of early game pressure at all. The Poppy obviously has to generate all that, and ideally you're going to want to run that through Unforgiven on the Neela in the bottom lane, but you just got to the point where it was like, not good. Like, Elyoya got completely out-jungled by Razork in this game, and that basically spelled the end of Mad's chances, because by the time you got to the power spike where Kennen and Nocturne were supposed to make that team fight really, really devastating with the Neela going in and kind of blowing everybody up in this big burst chain, Wonder was so far ahead of Armut that the Kennen wasn't doing damage. The Nocturne was behind the Victor, and Neela wasn't really ahead at all on the Lucian. There really wasn't any opportunity for them to actively win in any of these fights. And so overall, Fnatic's draft very risky, but they were able to execute on it in the way that they needed to in order to win the game. And obviously they ended it very quickly. They basically just ended the game with Herald, quite frankly. So really, really phenomenal job from Fnatic. As for Mad Lions, not a great game number one to get completely blown out like this, but I don't even think it's really Draft's fault. Like I said, if you get to the 20-minute mark with this comp, and you're even remotely even, then I think you're probably in a decent spot. Where I think the problem is that they got so blasted in the early game that it didn't even really matter how well they played in the late game. They were behind so much, and they started to pick some stuff up, but at the end of the day, it was really just what Fnatic was willing to give them in terms of kills. Armut got super far behind in the top lane, got completely destroyed by Wonder and Razork. Razork was everywhere in this game, but especially top lane and especially affecting that Kennen. Armut is going to get my dud of the game in game number one here. I've talked about it multiple times on this channel. Pretty much every time I've talked about Mad Lions, Armut has been the weak link, I should say, for Mad Lions so far this year. Elyoya, Niski, Unforgiven, Kaiser, all very good players. In fact, Niski, Unforgiven, and Kaiser were on my first team. Elyoya was on my second team. Armut was not even close to consideration for the All-Pro teams for me. He has really, really been a huge weak link for this team, and this comp relies so much on him being able to get ahead. Obviously, Niski as well, but Niski was able to generate at least kind of a lead in this game. It wasn't the most consistent lead. He was able to get on upset with the ultimate. He just wasn't able to do much outside of that. You really need that Kennen follow-up, and especially the Neela follow-up to make that Nocturne pick worth it. So I'm not really blaming Niski. I'm blaming Armut, who's my dud of the game. I'm blaming Elyoya for getting completely out-jungled here by Razork, and I'm blaming Unforgiven and Kaiser, who just couldn't win that matchup. Obviously, I'm not blaming them for losing the 2v2 with Lucian Nami, but at some point you have to realize that you have to get gold, and you need to call your mid and your jungle for attention, and you need to make sure that Neela can get online. Like, this team needs to start recognizing its win conditions, because clearly it did not in this game. Elyoya didn't really have a presence, and that was a huge problem for Mad as a whole. Overall, I think this is reboundable. It's not a great way to start the series mentally, but I honestly don't think draft was that much of a problem for Mad Lions. I really think it was just Fnatic got such a good early game that it became unwinnable. That is not going to ideally happen consistently. You need to be able to generate leads to win in League of Legends, at least in this meta. And I think if Mad Lions can do that, they're still in a pretty good spot. Elyoya and Niski are still one of the better jungle mid duos in the league. Even though Razork has been phenomenal, he's not unflappable. He's been better in the playoffs, but remember, this is someone who could have been taken advantage of in the regular season, and Elyoya did exactly that, and Niski did that to Humanoid in the regular season as well. There are definitely openings for this Mad Lions team to win. They just need to recognize them and play to them early and fast and generate that lead so that they can be able to get to that late game in a better spot. Fnatic, great execution here. I'm basically going to trust them to play anything they want at this point. They've basically proven that whatever they play, they're going to execute on in the playoffs, and so I trust them. I trust their draft. Even if I don't think this is very good myself, I definitely believe that Fnatic is a team that can pull it off. So who's going to win Game 2? Is Fnatic going to be able to go up 2-0 and really solidify their place as, you know, they've really come online, like this team has really figured it out at this point? Or is Mad going to be able to answer back, get the series to 1-1, calm down expectations, and then you can kind of get back to an even footing? Well, in game number 2, the winner was Mad Lions. They are able to take game number 2 here, a really, really important win for them, as obviously game 1 certainly did not go the way they anticipated. They even up the series though at 1-1, basically making it like that blowout never happened as we start the best of 3 basically from here on out. But what happened in game number 2? Well, Mad was able to generate a pretty enormous early game lead, which shocked me at the time because again, like I talked about in Game 1, things kind of didn't go the way of Comp Diff, in my opinion. I actually think Fnatic had a really interesting early game draft that could have been really exploitable on their end. Razork just not investing into the lane I would have invested in. Elyoya, on the other hand, doing a lot of what he needed to do to make sure that his team was in a good spot. A phenomenal early game from Elyoya to generate an early game lead for Mad Lions, a team that it has Aatrox, has Sivir, has Ahri, these picks that are going to scale into the late game. The early game lead from them is absolutely massive. It completely changes the outlook of how they are going to play the rest of this game, and they do a really good job of capitalizing on that. Like I said, a lot of that is off the back of Elyoya in the jungle. It's his turn to gap Razork. Spanish junglers going back and forth. It's really fun to watch, but Elyoya has a great game too here, not only being able to make sure that Unforgiven and Kaiser are in a relatively decent spot going into a Lucian Nami lane that just should be stronger than them and was for a good portion of this game, but making sure that Unforgiven and Kaiser really weren't in the spot to be taken advantage of, and then also making sure that Armut had the backup and the assistance that he needed in the top lane, because Razork was certainly determined to invest a ton of resources into that Gwen in the top lane. Unfortunately for him, it didn't work out nearly as well as it did in Game 1 when Wunder was up there. Armut does a great job of being able to absorb that pressure on the Aatrox, a pick that's significantly safer in the top lane, and I really think he was able to translate a lot of that into a gold lead for Mad Lions. It allowed Elyoya to be on the bot side a lot more. He was able to stack dragons. They were eventually able to get Infernal Soul pretty early into this game, and at that point, you've got Ahri, you've got Sivir, you're able to do a lot of damage. Now, it wasn't that simple. Fnatic did actually attempt to make a comeback in this game, a lot of it being based off of Upset's damage towards the back half of this game. Obviously, Lucian still does a ton of damage in the late game if he is ahead, and Lucian did have gold in this game, at least in comparison to a lot of the other players on Fnatic and even on Mad Lions at the time. It was a lot closer than it really had any right to ever be, because you look at these comps and you look at Fnatic's comp and you're like, if they don't win early, they probably lose the game, and guess what? They didn't win early, but Mad Lions did a really poor job of executing in the mid to late game, and that's kind of been a consistent theme with them. They're a team that I don't think consistently closes out games in the best way possible. We saw that in the series against Rogue, and it was something in this game that I was definitely concerned about. But Elyoya played great. Armut was my secondary player here on Mad Lions. He was phenomenal in that top lane, absorbing so much pressure from Razork and from Wunder in the early game, and really just being able to outclass Wunder in that top lane in this matchup. Very similar to what happened in Game 1. It's just flipped. Instead of Razork and Wunder really making sure that Armut had a tough time in that lane, Armut and Elyoya were making sure that Wunder had a very tough time in that lane. Obviously not always Elyoya, but Armut did a really good job of this game. This is one of his better games in quite a while for someone who I've been pretty critical of. And then Unforgiven and Kaiser did a good job of playing safe in the early game. Obviously, Sivir Yuumi into Lucian Nami isn't very Sivir favored. You can get blown up very quickly in that matchup because of the damage buffs that Nami can give Lucian. But at the end of the day, if you get to that breakpoint in the mid game, you're going to eventually be able to outscale. Once you hit your third item, you become 3-item Sivir, and then your damage is going to be so much higher than Lucian's. Unfortunately for him, Lucian was able to pick up some kills here and there on the Ahri, on the Vi, so there was a situation where Lucian was actually pretty strong towards the end of this game, but they were luckily able to avoid the worst of it. As for Fnatic, tough game too. Obviously, you wanted to build on the momentum that you had in game number 1 with absolutely demolishing Mad Lions, but in game number 2, you just weren't able to generate the same kind of early game lead that you did in game 1, and you actually did it with a more early game focused team. You actually draft the Lucian Nami in this game. You go the Trundle to try to facilitate the lanes, but Razork wanted to go back to that game 1 strategy of investing in Gwen, or Wunder, I should say, in the top lane here, and I just don't think that was the way I would have done this. I think Lucian Nami was winning on their own in the 2v2. If you could have accelerated that lead even more, you could have controlled the entire bot side, you could have started stacking dragons, and this might have been a little bit of a different game, but at the end, Razork threw basically everything away to go and help Wunder in the top lane, and it just didn't work out. This has been a strategy that this team has gone to quite a few times over the past few years. Unfortunately, it just wasn't able to come to fruition in this game. Wunder is actually going to get my dud of the game here on the Gwen. Like I said, got a ton of resources in the top lane and still had absolutely no pressure at all. Gwen into Aatrox is actually pretty Gwen favored for the early part of the matchup. Obviously, Aatrox will eventually hit that breakpoint where neither can kill each other, which eventually happen, but during the early part of the game, Gwen should actually be able to duel Aatrox relatively seamlessly, and then when you have a Trundle there to be able to assist with Pillar, and obviously the damage that comes out, even being able to steal some tank stats if you want to gank post 6, those should be incredibly effective on the Aatrox. Unfortunately, they just weren't able to outplay him in any meaningful way, and you got to the point in this game where Armut was just stronger than Wunder because of the way he had played in the early game. So Wunder is going to get my dud of the game. I think you could realistically give it to Razork as well for just being out-jungled by Elyoya, but at least he was trying to make plays at the end. Wunder just wasn't able to capitalize on any of them. And I mean, obviously Razork wasn't able to capitalize on them either. So overall, not an awful game for Fnatic, but not a good one. You certainly want to see this team be able to win the early game. It's not the end-all be-all. They obliterated Mad in game 1. I definitely know that this team has the ability to beat Mad Lions pretty consistently. They're just going to have to actually show it now, because now we're basically entering a best of 3. And if you can win 2 games from here on out, you are moving on. If you can't, you're out. You're out of the playoffs. You're the final team at Worlds. You're the 4th seed, and so obviously, Fnatic really needs to get their head back on straight, but I definitely trust this team in terms of talent to be able to do so. I would see this as more of a blip on the radar than anything. As for Mad Lions, very, very good win. Obviously, it keeps you in a good position in this series. Fnatic is a team that can really spiral out of control. When they have good mental, they're basically unstoppable. So Mad really needs to put themselves in a position now where they just copy this formula. If they can generate that early lead again, if they can make sure that someone like Elyoya or even someone like Armut or Unforgiven, whichever side of the map you want to play to, has that lead that they're able to translate into the mid to late game to be able to stack dragons or to be able to generate team fight leads, just be able to spread the wealth around to everybody on the team. The macro of this team has always been really, really good in the mid game. If they can close their game a little bit more consistently, this is a very, very good team that can beat Fnatic. We've seen that multiple times in the regular season, and so obviously, Game 3 is going to be absolutely crucial for the series. Whoever generates that 2-1 lead is often in a pretty good spot to be able to take the series. A little less so in this year's playoffs, just with the amount of Game 5s that we've gotten, but 2-1 is a pretty big lead to generate. So, who is going to be able to generate that in Game number 3? Well, the winner of Game number 3 was Fnatic, as they are able to take Game number 3 here and put themselves up 2-1 in the series. A good bounce back from game number 2. This felt a lot more like game number 1 than it did game number 2. Mostly because, again, a pretty solid start to finish effort from Fnatic. They really controlled a lot of the game, even if the early game wasn't nearly as aggressive. Obviously, not nearly as short of a game, but really, the early game wasn't all that, like, differentiating, I think, for either of these teams. Both Razork and Elyoya were kind of fine in the early game. Both were making plays. Obviously, Elyoya has the advantage in this matchup. I talk about it all the time in the Wukong versus the Sejuani, but outside of that, Mad Lions, you look at their comp and you're like, Cassiopeia, Aphelios, like, okay, you want to play for the late game, but you also draft the Renekton in the top lane. We'll get to why I don't like that in a bit, but even Fnatic, you're looking at Sylas, you're looking at Ornn, you're looking at Sedge. Like, really not a lot of pieces that impact the early game, but then you also have the Kalista in the bottom lane. Now, the Kalista can scale, and I do think Fnatic really saw that, because they realized, oh, if we get Kalista super far ahead on this Aphelios in this game, then we can get to a point in the late game where some of these fights are going to be a ton easier, because she can output a ton of damage really quickly on this front line that they really don't have, right? Like, they have Renekton and they have Wukong, and that's your quote-unquote front line. Well, Kalista can absolutely shred through them very, very quickly, get the reset on her E, and then move to Cassio, move to the Aphelios, things like that. It can be a really, really big problem for Mad Lions if you get upset ahead here, and I do think Fnatic realized that as they started to invest a lot towards the bot side of the map here. They, whether Razork was coming down, which wasn't always the case, or whether Humanoid was coming down, which was a little bit more common. Obviously, we saw quite a few moments from Fnatic where they wanted to make sure that Upset got a ton of kills here on the Kalista, moved into the mid game, and then started to team fight late. Now, who really took advantage of those late game team fights? That was Humanoid. This was Humanoid's game, and it is unbelievable. It's really, really fun to watch him just be back. Like, he's just back. Like, it really feels like this is Humanoid from last year in the playoffs now, and not the Humanoid that we had gotten all year in 2022 on Fnatic so far, because this was a phenomenal endgame from him on the Sylas. We've been talking about this pick all year as something that Humanoid really has played way too aggressive on, and he's honestly gotten caught out on this champion quite a considerable amount of times. But he outplayed Niski just purely 1-to-1 in this game. Like, it wasn't even close. He was so much better than what Niski was able to put out on that Cassio in the late game. Obviously so. Sylas can do a ton there. Obviously, I like the Cassio counter pick. I'll talk about that in a bit, in terms of the lane matchup, but in terms of the macro part of the game, there's so much that Cassio just quite frankly can't do in terms of Sylas that Humanoid was just able to get a ton in advance there, and then he honestly used Renata ults better than Kaiser did at most of the points in these games. Like, the Renata ult was absolutely ginormous for Fnatic throughout the last half of this game, being stolen on the Sylas. So Humanoid absolutely, in my opinion, deserves the player of the game here in game number 3. A great mid game from him to make sure that Upset had all the breathing room that he needed to generate his lead himself, and then a great late game from him. The team fighting was exceptional from Humanoid. Absolutely world-class level. And then you gotta give a lot of credit to the bot lane as well. Like I said, Upset did a great job of being able to generate that lead. He was given a lot of resources to do so, but he did a good job on the Kalista to generate it. And then a huge game, in my opinion, from Hylissang on this Braum pick. Obviously, Braum can be played very passive, but he can also be played very aggro if you feel like you can win the matchup. And that's how Hilly played this matchup. I really don't think that surprises anybody. Hilly playing aggro isn't the most surprising thing in the world, but Hilly really was setting up Kalista in a really, really easy way here. Obviously, Braum's level 1, level 2, level 3 are some of the strongest in the game, and he was able to take advantage of a very weak Aphelios in the early game to be able to just basically purely pressure him out of lane consistently over and over again. And not even that, but he was consistently outplaying Kaiser in this bottom lane as well. And Kaiser, obviously, in my opinion, the best support in the LEC. For Hylissang to come out on a more, you know, hit-or-miss champion, I should say, in Braum, and really, really just dominate the Renata pick, I think is a huge, huge plus for Hylissang. Honestly, this Fnatic team has looked so much better. They looked like what everybody wanted to see from them all throughout the season, and they've looked like that pretty consistently over the course of the last few series in the playoffs. But Humanoid, Upset, Hylissang were great. Wonder and Razork, while being the main attractions, I think, for Fnatic in the first 2 games, really weren't all that important in this game, and I think that's a good sign for them. It means that they don't have to rely on those 2 players to win games. You can win through any of your 5 players, which is a good sign. Razork wasn't all that dominant in the early game. Wonder just got to play tank duty and just kind of relax a little bit. And Humanoid, Upset, and Hylissang did have the potential to carry the load for Fnatic, and I think that's a huge win for this team, and they're going to be very, very happy to move 2-1 up in this series. As for Mad Lions, definitely a rough one. A lot of these picks I understand in a vacuum. Like, I understand Renekton into Ornn because you want to try and take advantage of Ornn's weaker early game, well, quote-unquote weaker early game, by being able to pressure him out, getting assistance, and moving into essentially taking Aatrox's role, but with just a little bit more of an early game focus. And then you also have the Cassio and the Aphelios to scale, not to mention you have Cassio into Sylas, which I think is generally a really strong counter pick for, like, Cassio. Cassio is really strong in that matchup because she can ground Sylas. She can make it so that he can't dash in if she can see him coming, obviously, if you can play it well enough, but that's really only a lane counter. Obviously, outside of lane in teamfight, Sylas is still going to be a little bit of an issue, especially if he can get roams off, which he was doing very, very consistently in this game. And honestly, Niski didn't play the Cassio all that well towards the back half of this game. I don't think he hit an ultimate in any of the team fights in this one, and that's definitely a problem. Cassio's ultimate definitely needs to be on point for you to really win the game with her. Obviously, her damage can be really high, and she was still able to pick up a few kills on the Sylas, some on the Sedge. But at the end of the day, like, his impact compared to humanoids in this game was very, very, very negligible, and I think that's a huge problem when you pick a big scaling threat like Cassie. And then the same thing for Aphelios. Obviously, you just need to survive the early game. There are a lot of AD carries in the meta that I think do Aphelios' job just a tad bit better right now. Unforgiven wants to go to that pick, but he goes into the Kalista, which is just able to completely dominate him out of lane in the early game. He has to survive. He has to get to this break point where him and Kalista are in a relatively similar spot, and that means he is stronger because by 2 items, by 3 items, Aphelios is going to be doing a ton more damage than someone like the Kalista. Unfortunately for him, Kalista got super fed in this game, and he wasn't really able to keep up. And then there's my dud of the game, which is Kaiser on this Renata. Not only was he a problem in lane, really being taken advantage of by a really aggressive Braum play, getting caught out multiple times around dragon fights, and really setting that Kalista up to be in a really good spot towards the mid to late game, but honestly, even his late game wasn't all that good. You talk about Renata at being a complete teamfight changer because of that ultimate. It is absolutely massive, and none of those ults were really all that effective, and like I said earlier, honestly, Humanoid had better Renata ults this game than Kaiser did, and that's definitely a little bit disappointing if you're a Mad Lions fan. Overall, I would say that this game was not perfect for Mad Lions, but it's definitely recoverable. We've seen teams come back from 2-1. We've seen teams come back from worse, and so this team definitely has the talent and definitely the grip on the meta right now to be able to do that, but they really need to start going back to what they did in the regular season that made them successful. I want to see more Talia. I want to see I mean, the Wukong's good, but I want to see more of the hyper carry bot laners that have an impact early game. Something like a Sivir, something like a Zeri. Make sure that those are available. Good job on Fnatic to really not, like, you know, to push them out of that direction. Like, you take away the Draven, you take away the Lucian in this game. Those have been good picks for Unforgiven, but they themselves are the ones banning out the Zeri. Sivir was left completely unpicked in this entire draft phase. There are multiple opportunities, I think, for Unforgiven to get on something that's going to be a little bit more consistent. If Fnatic wants to go in the direction of something like the Kalista, you can punish that. As for Fnatic, just keep this going. I think you are clearly the better team in terms of player-to-player matchup. As long as you can put yourself in a position where your 1v1s can win, or your 2v2s can win, then I think you're probably going to be in a good spot to take this series. But obviously, you need to watch out for Mad Lions just playing that macro game and getting the numbers advantage in a way that you aren't really able to adapt to. So, that's really the preview here for game number 4. Obviously, it's win or go home for Mad Lions here. If they cannot win, they're going to be the 4th and final seed at Worlds for the LEC, and Fnatic will continue their rampage through the LEC playoffs. But obviously, we could force a big game 5 here if Mad Lions is able to pull out the win. So, were they able to do it? Was Mad Lions able to pull out the win in game number 4 here? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Fnatic. They are able to close out the series here in 4 games and make their way to losers finals, the semifinals of the LEC. They are a top 3 team after the struggles that they went through this year. That is absolutely incredible to say about this Fnatic roster, who is really coming together at the exact right time. Obviously, very unfortunate for Mad Lions, but we'll get to them in a bit. Let's talk about what Fnatic did to secure their spot in the semifinals in this game number 4. Well, man, what happened to Razork? Like, this is a guy who I think was really struggling for a majority of the regular season, maybe less so than a lot of other outlets would lead you to believe. He was still a very good jungler, but he kind of played his way out of, like, the elite column, where I felt like the top 4 junglers in the region were all very close maybe going into the season. He very much felt like the easy number 4 option throughout most of the year in those opportunities. But man, in the playoffs, it has been a completely different story for Razork, who has been genuinely unbelievable. He's been the best jungler in the league in the playoffs, and he's an easy choice for player of the game here in game number 4 on the Trundle. A phenomenal game. This is a pick that he has consistently been able to bring out over the course of the playoffs and succeed on. This is clearly the pick that I think he feels the most comfortable on, at least in the meta right now, and it very much works for him. He's able to create so much pressure around the map, whether it's Wunder in the top lane in game 1, or whether it's Lucian Nami in this game number 4. Obviously, a very strong lane in and of itself, but Razork did a really good job of investing into that upset Hylissang lane and making sure that Lucian got to a point in this game where he was so ridiculously strong that even the Sivir in the late game really wasn't going to be able to match any sort of damage that he was going to be putting out, because he was always going to be an item and a half up on her, which is pretty amazing. Obviously, you got to give a lot of credit to Upset in that respect as well, because he is the one that did get fed. But a lot of force feeding from Razork, a lot of force feeding from Hylissang. Upset did a great job of capitalizing on all the opportunities that the Trundle and the Nami gave him, and you gotta give him credit for that. His positioning in the back half of these team fights was very good. He was caught out a little bit extra sometimes, maybe playing a little bit too aggro, but on Lucian, you kind of have to be like that in pro, at least towards the back half of the game when you're this fed. Just get out as much damage as possible. You have other damage threats on the team. You have a Victor, you have a Gwen, you have people who can clean up a team fight. If you're able to get 2 or 3 people and then die, you can have a Gwen or a Victor be able to clean up the rest of that fight, and it'll work out. Obviously, I don't love the Victor pick in general. I think it's very slow, but I think it's fine in the meta. Like, I think it's fine when you are able to invest so much into the bottom lane. When you're able to say, like, Lucian Nami is going to carry us through the early game, they're going to be a big problem. Victor can still scale online. It just takes him significantly longer to get there than I think a lot of the other, you know, quote-unquote meta mid laners right now. Luckily for him, he didn't have to play into one of those, as he played into the Twisted Fate into the mid, in the mid lane matchup, and TF is really not good right now, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I just gotta give a lot of praise to Fnatic. I gotta give praise to Razork, Upset, Hylissang, an absolutely ginormous win to keep their playoff hopes alive. They're in the top 3, which I don't think a lot of people would have expected. A great game 4, a great series overall for Fnatic. You gotta be pleased with how they were able to play this one. But for Mad Lions, on the other hand, I mean, you've got to be disappointed if you're a Mad Lions fan, not just because they lost, but because, I mean, they're going to Worlds, yes, but they didn't win a single best of 5 all year long. They were 7th in spring. They didn't even make playoffs. And then here in summer, they lost the only 2 best of 5s that they played in playoffs. And so, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. This team really, really leaves a lot to be desired and a lot of question marks on the board after having 4 first-team All-Pro members in the regular season. I think, you know, obviously that's pretty crazy in and of itself considering they weren't the #1 team in the LEC, but even outside of that, like, I put 3 on my team. It's not like I'm disagreeing with the selections, and Elyoya being first team, the one I had second team, isn't all that crazy of a pick anyways. Like, I really think you could make a genuine case that Elyoya deserved to be the first team All-Pro jungler. Like, I honestly don't even hate the picks. That's the crazy part, is this team was so meta-dominant in the regular season, and they could not translate that even a little bit into the playoffs. It's absolutely absurd. You have Niski, the MVP here, pulling out Cassio and Twisted Fate, and basically just praying that things go right for him because Taliyah has been banned out every single game against this Mad Lions team, and then he hasn't really been able to adapt and become that big meta presence that he was in the first, you know, 5-6 weeks of the season. And then you also have someone like Unforgiven not really being able to step up and be as good as a player like Upset, which is very disappointing. Unforgiven obviously had a phenomenal season, but he is still a rookie at the end of the day. This is his first full year in the LEC. He's been put a lot of pressure has been put on him, and unfortunately he just wasn't able to make good of that pressure in the first season here, at least for now. Obviously they still have a shot at Worlds, but in the playoffs, it certainly didn't look good. He's going to get my dud of the game here in game number 4. Just got completely outplayed by Razork and Upset and Hylissang in this game. The Sivir really needed the opportunity to get online for this comp because you look at the rest of this team and they don't have any damage. They have Lee Sin, they have Twisted Fate, neither of which are offering any damage at all after 15 minutes. Like, when you get to the late game team fighting stage, nothing coming out of either of those two. Aatrox will do a bit of damage, but certainly not enough to be a secondary carry on this team. You are relying on this Sivir to be a hyper carry for this draft, and unfortunately Unforgiven got so far behind in the early game because of a bunch of pressure, and honestly just because of him pushing up a little bit too far, that by the time you hit the late game, they basically had a 0% chance to win any of those 5v5 team fights, which is exactly what this comp wants to do, maybe outside of the Twisted Fate. You draft the Aatrox to team fight, you draft the Lee Sin to team fight, or, you know, to get picks, but picks that lead into objective control and things like that. Sivir obviously wants to do that, Yuumi obviously wants to do that. There's so many things on this comp that really just don't make sense to me, and Unforgiven, unfortunately, just wasn't able to make good on all of the pressure that was put on him in this big Game 4, and throughout the series just in general. We've been talking about Elyoya and Kaiser. I think they've probably been the most consistent members, but even they weren't all that good in this series. They were significantly outplayed by Razork and Hylissang, respectively, and that's not a great sign. Like, Mad Lions definitely has a lot of major questions going into Worlds. Do I think that they can adapt and ideally come out on top? Yes, but they're in arguably the worst spot of any team in the play-ins because they're a Pool 2 play-in team, which is not good for them. It means they're going to get one of NA's number 3 seed, Korea's number 4 seed, or China's number 4 seed in their play-in group. And that is hugely negative towards their chances of actively getting out of a group. Like, there is a really, really difficult proposition in front of them. It means they're probably going to have to play a best of 5 against one of the other major regions in order to even make group stage at the very best, which is not a good situation to be in. So there were a lot of question marks about Mad Lions. They didn't really answer any of them in the series, and you just hope that they're going to be able to find their form and find their footing before they go to Worlds. As for Fnatic, a phenomenal series overall. Player of the series is such an easy choice. It's Razork again. He's gotten it in all 3 of Fnatic's playoff series so far. He has been a fantastic player consistently for this Fnatic team throughout the playoffs. And if he plays like this is a finals team. They have a rogue matchup that I'm going to preview in just a bit, but you got to give a lot of credit to Fnatic for even making it this far. There are so many analysts that did not predict them to even get here, me included. I predicted them to get to the Mad Lions game. I did not think they were going to be able to easily, quite frankly, beat up on this Mad Lions team. They destroyed Misfits. They really convincingly beat Mad Lions. Rogue is on the docket next, and it's going to be an incredibly interesting matchup. I'm excited to preview that, but for now, you gotta give Fnatic some props. They put themselves into a very good position, and they're actually in a decent spot to be able to skip the play-ins entirely at Worlds, which would be a huge boon for this team. Alright, well that's going to do it for my overview and analysis of our Round 3 series, but we still have to preview our losers finals, our semifinals. Obviously, G2 beating Rogue in the upper bracket finals, the winners finals, to move on to the LEC Championship Series, but we still have to determine who's going to be facing G2 in that series. Is it going to be the number 2 seeded Rogue team or the number 5 seeded Fnatic team? Obviously, Fnatic coming off of a win against Mad Lions. Rogue already beat Mad Lions in the playoffs to get to this spot, but weren't able to take care of G2 in the upper bracket. This is an incredibly interesting series between probably clear-cut at this point the 2 and 3 teams in the LEC. Fnatic, obviously, I think has the talent to be much higher than that. But we just got to see if they can pull it together. They have been able to do it in the playoffs so far, but Rogue is probably their toughest competition yet, and it's going to be an incredibly interesting matchup. Ironically, Fnatic was actually one of the teams that was able to take a win off of Rogue in the regular season, to actually be able to beat them pretty consistently. Unfortunately, Rogue was able to get one more else on them, and I think this matchup is a little bit interesting to talk about. So let's start in the bot lane. Let's start with Upset and Hylissang versus Comp and Trimby. I think on paper, you would honestly give this to Fnatic, at least in the short term. Upset and Hylissang are very, very good players, and they've been playing really, really well in the playoffs, especially Hylissang, who has been really, really phenomenal. He's gotten back to this aggressive playstyle, but not in the way where it's really punishing his team. I think early on in the season, and throughout the season, honestly, he was playing that aggressive playstyle, but in a lot of times, it really wasn't during times where he was available to do that, right? You would have a big lead in the jungle on the enemy team, and he would still be pushing in the bot lane and pushing for wards and playing really aggro, and he would get punished consistently for it. I think when the rest of his team is winning, Hilly is going to look like one of the best supports in the region, and he's going to make his team better. Unfortunately, when this team doesn't get a big lead, Hylissang can also still sometimes be punished, and Comp is very consistent. Comp is really not, of all the players in the LEC, Comp is the one I expect the least to really lose lane. He does not lose lane. It's unbelievably consistent what Rogue does in this bottom lane, which is not really give them a ton of attention in the early game. They really pump a lot into Malrang, which we'll get to, but not really give a lot of attention to this bot lane here for Comp and Trimby, and then hope later in the game that they're going to be even, because Comp's late game teamfighting has been phenomenal for Rogue, and the drafting in general has been phenomenal for Rogue. So it's definitely going to be interesting. I think Upset is a more talented quote-unquote player than Comp is, but Comp has been incredibly consistent, and we know Upset and Hylissang can be taken advantage of in situations where the map state doesn't perfectly favor them. In the mid lane, though, we have Humanoid and Larson. Definitely an intriguing matchup here. I would pretty soundly give this favored to Humanoid. And this is, again, like, I think a lot of people say that I'm very low on Larson. And I think in terms of, like, public opinion, I probably am. I think he's definitely the bottom of, like, the upper tier mid laners in the LEC when you're talking about, like, the top 6, or the top 5 or 6. I think he's definitely towards the bottom of that list. And I think Humanoid, you know, throughout the whole season has been the bottom of that list, but he really has shown a different side of him in playoffs. He's been fully unlocked. I see a lot of memes where it's like Humanoid finally plugged in his keyboard, and it really does feel like that. He was someone who was consistently dying early, before level 3, in a lot of cases, getting a lot of jungle attention in the mid lane and not really being able to absorb that all that well, but ever since he's been playing a little bit more passive in the early game here for Fnatic, he's been able to show that he still is one of the better mid-game team fighters in the game, like for mid lane, especially on those control mages. And while he's not perfect on all of the quote-unquote meta champions, he doesn't really play Talia, you know, things like that. He is super good on things like the Azir, and as we saw in a lot of the series up to this point on the Sylas, but picks like Victor are always going to be pretty big for him. They have been for a very long time, and Larson is in a similar boat. He really is not in a meta that makes him very comfortable. He is a good Azir player, but he is bad at the Talia. I would say worse than Humanoid. And really outside of that, like the Ahri, the Sylas, they're not really things that I think Larson has picked up all that consistently. And in this meta, and especially with the way that both of these players have been going in recent times, I would actually favor Humanoid in this matchup. And then in the jungle, you've got the King of Spring here in Malrang and the King of Summer playoffs so far in Razork. It's definitely an intriguing matchup. Razork is as hot as he's ever been right now in terms of momentum. He has been dominant. He's been the player of the series in Fnatic's last 3 playoff series, which is absolutely huge. If he can keep that up, Malrang's not going to be able to stop him. But you have to note that more so than any other team that they have played against up until this point in the playoffs, Rogue runs through their jungle in the early game. Malrang takes a ton of that pressure in the early game, really wherever he is at. The rest of the team is usually trying to funnel resources into, and that can be very good for Rogue, but it can also be a problem when the enemy jungler can sniff that out and really just make plays elsewhere on the map, create those numbers advantages, and create a situation where Rogue has to play from behind where they really just aren't as consistent. So I think this jungle matchup is going to be incredibly interesting. I'm not going to say it favors one or the other, but I'm definitely intrigued to see which way it goes. And that brings us to our key matchup of the series, at least in my opinion, and that is going to be our top lane matchup between Wunder and Odoamne. And I think that truly you can make a case that these are the two best top laners in the region. I think Broken Blade obviously would beg to differ with that conversation, but Wunder and Odo are definitely two of the players that I think get relied on the most by their team. I think Fnatic, as we saw in this series, they went into that series with Mad Lions, and they really wanted to invest in Wunder in the top lane, obviously to try to take advantage of the Wunder Armut matchup, which is Fnatic favored. But Fnatic all year long have really been partial to favoring Wunder in the top lane in a lot of these matchups. You can see he has 0 solo kills. That's not because he's playing bad, more so because he gets so much attention from the jungle in the top lane that often he doesn't really get solo kills, he just gets kills with his jungler on ganks. Now, the stats don't really back up the fact that he has been very, very good, because when he has bad games, they are pretty bad, but you're going to have to trust me on the fact that Wunder has been a pretty consistent force for Fnatic all year long. And then Odoamne on the other side does have the stats to back it up. 2nd in DPM, 2nd in damage percentage, 3rd in gold difference of 15. He's been a very consistent force for Rogue for I don't know how many years now. If he can generate that lead against Wunder, if you can get some bad Wunder games, I think Rogue is in a pretty good spot. That's actually a pretty big spot, I think, for both junglers to spend a lot of attention up in the early game. The top lane is going to be very, very dynamic. And I think that that is going to influence which direction this goes in. Like I said, if Odoamne can really dominate Wunder in that matchup, I think Rogue is in a pretty good spot. If Wunder can get a lot of gank assist and really put Odoamne behind, I think Fnatic's in a pretty good spot. Now, obviously, all of the lanes in this series are important. It was more difficult to pick a key matchup in this series than it was in almost any other series that I had done all year long. But I went with this top lane matchup specifically for the fact that I think it's going to be aggressive, more so than your standard top lane matchup, and I'm really, really excited to see how much these teams actively invest into their top side, because both teams are kind of known for doing so. So that's going to be the key matchup of the series. I do think that every single lane is going to be impactful here, but both of these teams definitely earned their way here, and I'm going to be very, very, very glued to the screen to see which one of these teams is going to be making their way to the LEC finals. Alright, well that is going to do it for my LEC Round 3 overview and analysis of the one series that we had, and then the preview of the one we are getting in the semi-finals. If you guys enjoyed, let me know down in the comment section below. Obviously, we've still got my prediction for this series, for Rogue Fnatic. Who do I think is going to have the advantage? Like I said, I think both of these teams really did earn their way here, but with momentum on their side, I'm honestly going to pick Fnatic to win this series, and I'm going to predict them to win it in 4 or 5 games. I actually think that the 2-game spread favors Fnatic more than it does favor an even split here, which I think just really shows how much Fnatic has grown recently. I'm definitely known for a little bit of a Fnatic bias on this channel, not because I'm a fan of the team or anything like that, but because they have consistently proven that no matter what they look like in the regular season, that they do show up in clutch moments, and I think they're going to be able to do that again, and I think, you know, despite all odds, we're going to be getting a G2 Fnatic finals in the LEC, but let me know if you guys agree with that down in the comment section below. Obviously, do you think Rogue is going to be the team that finally halts Fnatic's momentum, or is Fnatic going to carry what they've been doing all throughout the playoffs all the way to the LEC trophy? Let me know down in the comment section below, and let me know what you thought of the video as well. Of course, if you're enjoying what I do, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I'm putting out content all the freaking time on this channel. So if you are enjoying what I'm doing, please let me know down in the comment section below, and please let me know by hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button. It really does mean a lot to the channel. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.